with Renee.
Yo. We wait all week and all day for more. Saturdays with Renee.
All right. What's up, world? Welcome back to episode 86.
That's crazy.
Not the James Comey episode. We don't want no smoke. We not 86 and 47. We just episode 86 of Saturdays with Renee. Renee Johnston. I'm Jared Ball. Welcome back to Black Liberation Media. We are not live because we are holding off the show so that we can support what's happening right now. We will have to go catch up to the plenary live broadcast of the National Black Radical Organizing Conference that's taking place and being streamed live right now. So when they wrap up there, we'll go live and catch up to folks as we go. But we do have a great show lined up. But anyway, quickly, Renee, how you doing? What else? What's going on?
Look, it's the same old same. As well as capitalism allows, man. I'm here. I'm not on the run today. I'm actually in the house.
Oh.
I know. We do have some running to do later, but you know, that's why I couldn't like push him to start any later than we already had planned to. It was not going to work because I got some stuff to do. Similar to how your baby girl is in town. My stepdaughter's in town. She just turned 21. She's going back out to school tonight. So, you know, she's going to stay the summer out there. And so we can't do any more shifting of the day than we were already planning to do. So
yeah, no, the schedule gets locked in, folks. We got internships and rehabs and all kinds of stuff. So,
right.
So,
and we have guests. Right.
So do you want to tell us who's coming up later on before,
yes.
Or we just want to
I mean, so just so everyone knows, and Eugene's going to stay for it. We're going back to our Gen Z panel. That's going to happen tomorrow. And similar to how we did earlier when they came on, we'll bring two of the young people from Gen Z up. They'll join towards the end of the show to talk about what we have going on tomorrow. But I mean, I don't know that Eugene really needs an actual, I don't know. I feel like you could just do the claps and put his face on screen and then everybody can be excited.
I like that. So let's do that. We'll just welcome to the stage Eugene Puryear, who, of course, legendary longtime activist and organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation, co-host and anchor at Breakthrough News, and author of this introduction I just reread again this morning to the Black Belt Thesis Reader, which is just hundreds of pages of bars. So Eugene, welcome back. It's always good to see you, man. How you doing?
You know, I'm as well as capitalism allows, but I'm really happy to be here. And, you know, I'm always happy to be on the platform. So I appreciate y'all having me on.
No, right on. First of all, before we get anywhere, I do want to say again publicly that and I want to, as a reminder and in public inducement, I do want to have your co-host join us at some point, Rania Kalik, and who I've always been looking forward to building with, and so I just want to say that again. We look forward to that happening as well. I think you all do a great job. I just want
to throw in that if Jared attempts to do that without me,
that's why I'm saying it here.
It's going to be a problem.
It's here.
Collective
I don't want drama.
Okay, I'm just...
And I got to set it up. So we all have collective accountability.
There we go.
That's the whole point. Say, I'm very Daruba with everything. Everything but tactics has to be on the table. Anyway. How are we getting started?
Well, I feel like even though you did a really good intro, maybe Eugene can give us a little bit of his life story. You know, like I'm very curious. I honestly came across you very randomly like years ago. And so if you can give some, a little bit of your bio, a little bit of how you got here, how you ended up on Breakthrough, how you ended up with PSL, so people have some of your history, I think that would be a good place to start.
Wow. Yeah. When anyone asks you your history, then it's like, wow, am I old now? I'm telling my history, but yeah, I guess I am. So, it's been quite a journey, I guess. I mean, maybe to speak to some of the organizing pieces first, which is kind of what brought me into media, honestly, also somewhat randomly, but more intentionally when we came to Breakthrough. It's a whole long story, but I think a lot of it comes down to coming also from a household and an upbringing that was not only highly political, but very left-leaning, progressive, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I always tell people I have to be from like an infinitesimal number of households that grew up with like a pro North Korea message, and in the sort of broader political scheme of things, my dad was very strong on that issue. But whether we're talking about that, the labor union struggle, Palestine, all these different things, I was raised around a certain sort of type of politic for sure, that flows from the left tradition in the Black liberation movement. My father was, very involved in the civil rights movement as well. Also worked with Malcolm X, different things like that. My mom came up in the trade union movement under some of the giants of the Black trade union movement, like Bill Lucy and others. So that was always around. But the sort of proximate issue was the post 9/11 move, the extreme Islamophobia that was taking place. For instance, a friend of mine in the school who was Afghan, got in a fight every day for a week after 9/11 because people were blaming him for doing it, right? And that was like a shocking moment to see how quickly the country, like, was able to just be whipped up into a war frenzy. The introduction of the Afghan invasion and the build up to Iraq, like all of that. Also the Second Intifada, by the way, which was happening at the same time, which people often forget. All of that sort of brought me into the context of what, my family always said is, if you think something is wrong, you got to do something about it. And if you're not going to do anything, like, why complain? You might as well just keep it moving. So I felt like, all right, cool, let's do it. So I got involved in organizing as a high school student. We led a walkout against the Iraq War in my high school. We were doing various educational events, doing things like that. And, we were lucky enough to also have some mentors around us there locally in my hometown of Charlottesville, Virginia, that helped us connect the war to different issues. So I became a student at Howard University. And, in some ways, the rest is history, because I got there to DC and I sort of immersed myself in all sorts of different pieces. I'm a founding member of the PSL in 2004. And that was the year I ended up going to college, but I'd had a lot of interaction, through the anti-war movement with many of the other folks who had founded PSL, not direct interaction, but just like knowing who they were because you were at their events. But getting into DC and just diving headfirst into everything from organizing around real solutions to community violence, to housing, to the anti-imperialist issues, so on and so forth, and trying to link that to real organization. And ideologically, I mean, I think since I'm about 16, I consider myself a socialist communist, and trying to spread that, more broadly and all of the struggles I was involved in, and hopefully help the two kind of merge, the mass struggle and the ideological struggle and organization, to lift the movement to a higher level. And here we are. And at a certain point in 2020, we embarked upon Breakthrough because, listen, we're in a battle of ideas and emotions that is huge. And the level of consciousness of the masses is not where it needs to be. And a huge result of that is this massive propagandizing apparatus that's out there. The attitude of the internet now, where it's like drinking from a fire hose. There's so much information, but what do you trust? How do you know what's there, what's not? So it felt like, independent, socialist oriented, at least, although I'd say we have a pretty united front aspect at Breakthrough, media that was rooted in the justification of the struggles of people all across the world against imperialism and capitalism seemed necessary, and creating a dialogue between people who maybe don't agree on all those points within that sort of broader struggle, but we're often in the streets together, we're often at the same, events and so on and so forth. How can we create sort of a media-based analysis, dialogue, reporting, apparatus that can bring more of that out to more people. So I don't know if that's what you were looking for, Renee, but maybe that's my offering.
No, that was perfect. And so funny thing is, so while you were doing that work in Charlottesville as a high school student, I would have been your high school counselor if you lived in Fairfax, Virginia, which is where I was at the time when all of this happened. So I had no idea that I didn't know you were from Charlottesville, which that there's a whole lot there, UVA and 2000, like, there's a lot that, I mean, we could have a whole other conversation about you being who you are and from Charlottesville, because I just that is fascinating to me. But that also, I would have been your high school counselor, just has me like right now behind the scenes, because literally my first year as a high school counselor, which was my third year as a school counselor, was at a high school in 2001. I actually got pulled out of a freshman meeting because the vice principal knew I was from New York and he wanted to let me know what was going on. So this is like, wow, one, like, that you are so much younger than me and yet brilliant is like blowing my mind a little bit. And so, and also like this connection.
Yeah, man, fucking with Eugene is humbling.
Crazy.
It's a little bit dangerous, but unfortunately, if you want to be, if you want to be on the right side of things, it's necessary. So
yes, and I will put out the warning again: never listen to Eugene do anything while standing next to Hiram Rivera, because Hiram don't know how to act, and
he really don't. Hiram, he'll come across as Mr.
You just don't read, beloved.
But then, in certain situations socially, he's a little bit of a cut up. That dude is comedy, man.
I have to ask. So in Newark,
Eugene, preach, Eugene.
Right? Could you hear him while he was?
Yes. Yes, I could. I couldn't see him, but I could hear him, and it was giving me energy in the back. I mean, look, Hiram is a great brother, and he understood the assignment. He knew what I was bringing to the table, and it was hard to see because it was so dark when they put the lights down. You really couldn't see anybody. And the thing about public speaking is you do kind of ride off of the crowd itself and like judging people's reactions and things like that. So I'm just kind of doing my thing. So when I heard him in the back, I was like, yes, let's go. But that's the beauty of the Black liberation movement as a tradition, that I think, there was no conversation between the two of us, but we were able to just mesh through our history and our involvement in this movement, in this culture, to create a certain moment at that time that moved the crowd the way it needed to be moved. So yeah, that was a great event there. Shout out to Newark as well. My dad's hometown. Just to throw that out there.
Look at that. And so so everyone can just point your eyes real quick to my hashtag today, which everyone knows I change every week. And so people know that Eugene walked past me in Newark, and I was like actually afraid to tap him and say hello. So I didn't speak to him in public when we were in the same room. Which does not happen often.
Please feel free to feel free to
like,
speak
I'm
to
not
me
that
anytime.
person. I'm not that person normally. So
it's funny you say that. I've never had anyone come up to me and say anything negative. I mean, I've had a few people who look like they wanted to say something, but I think they didn't really want it like that. But it's one of the most gratifying things I actually do. I think, anyone who does media, anyone who's in the public eye, you can say like, it is a big change in your life when you lose like kind of public anonymity and anybody can say anything to you at any time because they know who you are. And it's a little jarring in some ways, but what I can say is it's also very gratifying because so many people do come up and say what you did on the media or this or that it meant something to them. And I think like, that's why we do this. We're not just trying to stare into a camera and just say stuff to be heard. I mean, some people are, but I think us here, the Black Liberation Media crew, Breakthrough News, the type of stuff we want to do, it is because we want to reach people, move them, and be useful to them in the things that they are doing. So I always appreciate it to hear those kind of things and to know. And I appreciate everybody who's ever come up and said something positive.
that's dope. And so this is actually a perfect segue into talking about independent media. Congratulations, Breakthrough hit 1 million, which was a big deal. I don't know, Jared. Jared never reads the run sheet almost unless I remind him to read it. Like, go read it because there's stuff on there you should see like in advance. But I did put stuff on the run sheet.
Oh my God.
I know, I'm sorry. But you know
Hold
how
up.
I get.
I checked it. Wait a minute. I checked it. Hold on a second. Wait a minute. I must be looking at the wrong thing. Hold on a second. Because I looked at it like I do actually peek at it from time to time just to make sure. And okay, no, I was looking at the wrong. Okay, I did not see this update, but my bad.
But
yeah,
now,
yeah,
but
yeah.
in
But
your
you
defense,
did add
though,
some stuff a lot.
I did.
You did add. Yeah,
I
yeah,
did.
yeah.
I did. But in your defense, this was like an hour before we were going. I was like, you know what? Let me just make sure I have some like quick things to direct to, and I like to have a backup plan always. Not that I anticipate ever running out of things to talk to, but you just never know what'll happen, and so. So I like to make sure. So on Jared, if we could play it for, because I think it's a great clip. On the Breakthrough News, that the link to Twitter is the announcement when they got to 1 million, which I just think is very well done. And so, do we want to play that real quick?
Sure.
If that works.
It's been wild here lately, but yeah.
Where would we even be without Breakthrough News, the biggest anti-imperialist voice in the country?
1 million members, that's it. It should already be 10 million.
We need independent media. Breakthrough News have been the independent media. Breakthrough News, in particular, has done a phenomenal job
to not only cover the struggles on the ground in the belly of the beast in the United States, but also across the world.
Corporate media lies about everywhere in the world. And if it weren't for outlets like Breakthrough News,
why did he plug that mic in though?
Never have another narrative.
I'm so happy that Breakthrough News has just reached 1 million subs.
When I want the news, I go to Breakthrough News.
Here's to many more years of incredible work. Please like, share, and tell all your friends about the great work of Breakthrough News.
Where would
Yeah.
That was a great little promo. That was great. So can you talk just, because we over here, I'm trying to figure out how to get everybody excited because we're like creeping up on 50,000, and I don't even know if Jared realizes we're creeping up on 50,000. And so I think we should do something when we get to 50,000. And then I saw that and I was like, 50,000 is really far from 1 million. And but you know what? Listen, it could be 50, and I think the work would still be worth it. You know what I mean? But but can you talk about like the work that it takes to be an independent media outlet and to get, to push for that, to get to that, like what, just I'm fascinated by like how that felt on your end.
Yeah, well, I mean, it felt good, of course, because it's a sign that, what we're doing is relevant to a large number of people, or at least a numerically large number of people. Although I think VJ's point is right. It should be 10 million, right? And I think you should celebrate 50,000 because we have to continue to celebrate our growth, I think, because it's not a competition. It's not a commercial thing, right? Like, oh, we have X number of viewers, X number of ad revenue, or whatever it may be. It's a sign that a certain type of politics is reaching a certain level of resonance with a certain number of people. And we have to move. Lenin always says that sectarians think about moving in the hundreds of thousands, but revolutionaries have to think about how to move in the tens of millions. And so I think this is the question we have to ask ourselves, but we have to move from the margins to the center to get there. So I think celebrating the milestones along the way that we're growing and implanting, and, it takes something for someone to become a subscriber, to follow. It doesn't take a lot, but it still is it's a sign of engagement. And I think the fact that we're growing engagement with a certain type of politics in a certain direction is very important. And so it felt good to reach it. I mean, it does take a lot of work. I mean, it's sort of a combination of factors. And I think this is, one of the elements of if you want to be people's media, as sometimes it's referred to, is a lot of your growth is also connected to the broader struggles that are taking place, right? So, whether it be 50,000, 500,000, or 1 million, the growth of Breakthrough News has been 100% predicated on our ability to actually cover real things being done by real people all around the world. And of course, the mass movement that arose in solidarity with the Palestinian people and against the genocide in Gaza is why we reached 1 million so quickly. Because in the context of what took place on October 7th, the amount of, there was really not that many places you could go that anyone was going to be treating the Palestinians with any significant justice. And in the context of the mainstream media in particular, it was terrible. So I think even many people who mainly were mainstream media consumers started to come more to Breakthrough for that reason alone. But if, millions of people around the world hadn't been wanting to go into motion to oppose this, if there wasn't this sort of unprecedented anger, revulsion, and mass movement against Israel and against apartheid and against genocide, it never would have happened, right? So it's not just our hard work, but it's the combination of our hard work with trying to be at least embedded in, accountable to, at least to some degree, and the voice of many of the movements that are out there. I mean, we played around with it and then we kind of dropped it, using the phrase the media arm of the movement. But I think internally we still think about that. And, some videos get 1 million views, some get 1,000. But oftentimes the 1 million and the 1,000 can be equally as important to us because of the topics and the things that are there. And, we are just as happy to be covering Waffle House workers walking out of their job as we are, the struggle against imperialism, against neocolonialism across the continent of Africa, to the ongoing effects of the blockade against Cuba, the documentary we were able to do about the Colombia encampments, the work that everyone was talking about Striketober a couple years ago. I mean, we were saying every week what strikes are out there, what union organizing is happening, how do we cover it? So really trying to just have this broad framework that's giving voice to real people, so that our growth is actually connected to the growth of those movements, and that to the people who aren't involved in those movements, it can help create a feedback loop to get people involved, which is why when we interview any person who is doing activism or organizing of any sort, we always say, how can people reach you? How can people find you? It's not just an offhanded question, but we're really trying to create a feedback loop there that can continue to grow those same things that we think are important to cover. So it was great to reach 1 million, but there's 200 some odd million adults in the United States. I think there's 1.4 billion people who speak English on Earth, and we're mainly an English language outlet, although we do, want to do more and find more partnerships in different languages, which we're also working on. So, stay tuned on that note. But yeah, if we really want to reach people, we need to do more. So we need to work harder. But, this is also the question of funding, which is a big issue. And it's also a question of distribution, which is an important issue. I mean, I'm kind of getting off topic now, I guess, but it feels relevant about how media works. I mean, I always say, if you think about whatever we think about Bernie Sanders, and we can make many critiques of him, but for the point of fundraising, in those two campaigns he ran in 2016 and 2020, he raised about $400 million. I remember that the day or two, or I think it was a week after George Floyd was murdered, the Minnesota Bail Fund, I believe got $90 million. Even smaller left-wing presidential campaigns in 2024 were raising, several $100,000. So it's not that there isn't grassroots funding there in terms of the ability to do it, but I think, how do we develop the muscle memory that people feel like donating to independent media is important? Because that will, that's one of the key factors that can take us to a higher level. Like, we can work harder, but we also need to expand our teams, expand our expertise, expand our technical capabilities, and all those different things to go beyond 1 million. So I'm saying that to say I'm happy with it, but we need to go further, and we can do more, but we need to create more of a sense, in the same way people donate to anything that matters to them, that media is actually a critical part of the battle. Like, the battle of ideas is huge. And I just think that we have lost sight of that in a way, because the situation is so dire on the planet Earth. I mean, you think about climate change just as one issue. Like, we're actually talking about the survival of humanity as a species on the planet as a real, present political discussion, not in 1,000 years, but soon. And then you can add everything else to that. But we obviously still live in the era of global counter-revolution. I mean, and what does that mean, right? the epoch of proletarian revolution, if you will. I mean, is really 1917, right? Like the first country that broke free of capitalism and imperialism, the Soviet Union. That country falls in 1991. But whatever the critiques we could make of the Soviet Union, it was obviously the main base of support for most anti-colonial movements, most movements against neocolonialism, many progressive movements around the world. It created a certain, level of contestation that people could have with capitalism and imperialism at a higher level because they had more of a foundation and a base behind them. The fall of that meant that, that wasn't there. And we can see the fall of so many different radical revolutionary movements, the rise of the unipolar era of US dominance. And that's shifting to some degree because of multipolarity. But the very fact that the genocide in Gaza can happen shows that it hasn't shifted that much, and that we're actually still at a level where, even though things are much better from the point of view of, I'd say, radical, revolutionary, progressive, however you want to frame it, than like 1992, that still we are in a very embryonic level of rebuilding the organizations, the ideological understanding, all the different things to really be able to contend in a significant way with these malign forces that are destroying the lives of so many people around the world. So this battle for ideas and this battle for media is so critical. So like that $5 a month to Black Liberation Media, that $5 a month to Breakthrough News is actually helping us punch above our weight in ways that I hope people can see more. And that's a big reflection to me on reaching 1 million, is if we want to go to 10 million, we have to see this battle of ideas and emotions as something that's key. And then we also have to recognize, and then I'll just stop here because I'm definitely rambling. As Dr. Jared Ball pointed out, and I Mix What I Like many years ago, you can make the mixtape, but how do you get it to people? And I think now we've been lulled into a false sense of security because, the social media makes it seem like you can reach so many more people. And in a way you can, but you don't control the algorithm, right? And I think that you actually have a similar issue as you've had with distributing independent newspapers, mixtapes, DVDs, all the things we've tried to do that they can shut you down at any moment. They can slow you down at any moment. I actually don't believe, and this is a big reflection I have, is I don't actually think it's possible to beat the algorithm. And I think the whole context of beating the algorithm is we're looking at it the wrong way because we don't know what the algorithm is. So how can you beat something that you don't even know how it's made? And they're never going to let you know that because it's proprietary for a reason. But you can overwhelm the algorithm. And when you look at some of the worst political forces on the planet, and the one I'm thinking about right now is the BJP in India, how have they become so dominant online? It's not because they're beating the algorithm. It's because they have a huge political organization, and they've organized it in such a way through their IT cell that they can move millions of people to post, often in their own authentic, organic way, the same information at the same time. So it's like the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is always going to trend because everyone's talking about it. Of course, the algorithm is helping the Super Bowl, but there's a certain level where in a moment you can overwhelm it. But to overwhelm the algorithm, you have to actually be rooted in real organization, and you have to be able to move the need to get on there and contend in the battle of ideas at tens of millions of people all at the same time, which means there has to be a feedback loop and a connection between the media and the grassroots organizing and the political parties in order to be able to drive that. And I think we've in a way, us reaching 1 million is an example of that. Like the point I made about Palestine. I mean, the point you made coming in that I'm a member of PSL, that there are people who support the Green Party that love Breakthrough News, that there's, different entities and organizations that are, working around Black Liberation Media who want to spread the content and to use and to tell other people that they need to get out and push it out in a real way. And I think we just need to start thinking more carefully about how do we tie our media and the importance of the battle of ideas into our movement task. That part of our grassroots organizing is getting people to share and to push out the media, because we'll never overwhelm the algorithm. So it's people that are going to help us get it out more than anything, beat the algorithm. But people will help us get it out, and we can occasionally overwhelm the algorithm, which will help us, but we have to be organized and related. And then on the same token, the way we give and use our money and our financial resources, also look at the importance of growing people's media as a tool that can really help us bring people from a lower level to a higher level of consciousness so that our political movements can do more.
No, right on. I don't know I don't pretend to know the business model of Breakthrough News, but I've always assumed that it has been successful in large part because of the pre-existing organization. And that is something that I've always thought was somewhat confused in some of the discussions of how we should engage media and so on. I don't think we can expect I just don't think we can expect to enter a media space like this disorganized and build the win from there. I think you have to have a certain level of organization in advance, and then operating outside of the media or the platform itself. So I just wanted to highlight that. I think that's an important point. Yeah.
And only because you mentioned it, and so I think it's probably a question that folks will ask. If you are able to, can you talk a little bit about how Breakthrough News is funded, just so people have some clarity about why you're able to be an actual independent media source?
Well, all you got to do is Google us, I guess. All the information is out there. I mean, listen, it's a combination of things. I mean, we were lucky enough to have some support from people who have institutional resources to get started. And, that is often the case. Somebody has to come in to lay the foundation. So we were lucky enough to have the relationships. And this goes to your point, Jared. We were lucky enough to have the relationships based on the work we had done politically, to have people who have resources want to commit to a media project that we were proposing be done. But of course, we get crowdfunding from people. I mean, that's why we're always pitching our Patreon. I mean, and you're on YouTube, you get Google ad revenues. So, I mean, we're bringing it in from various different circumstances. But, but this is the point I'm kind of making about grassroots funding is, you don't want good ideas to have to be based on somewhat happenstance. Like, it's not happenstance that we did good organizing, because we obviously did it intentionally, but it's to some degree happenstance that organizing attracts people who have the ability to help you advance projects you want to advance that do require, some upfront funding, right? So how do we start to create funding mechanisms that are easier to access for a broader group of people with ideas and things they want to do? And I think that is organization that has strong grassroots funding, that people can engage with those organizations, and then by engaging with the organizations, put themselves in a position to launch new ideas to help those organizations and those movements grow, right? So I think we need to sort of shift our thought process about that. But that is, essentially how we are funded through a coalition effort of various different forces. But we were lucky in a way, and I think I'm glad that luck landed on us. The roulette wheel hit black for us. But we have to, I think, move in a different way. And it's like the foundation world is not going to do it for you. I think anyway, you know what I'm saying? Ultimately, until we can build broader, bigger, accountable organizations that have more money from a broad subset of working class people, it'll be harder to launch and sustain and to maintain independent media. And it then is always going to be a fight to find the person who will give you the money, to find the people who will give you a small amount of change, to be able to eke out what you can eke out from, the Googles and the Facebooks that give you some revenue. You're always kind of on the precipice in a way. And I think that's even when you feel safe for a couple years, what happens after 3 years, all these different things that I think anyone who has tried to take on, forget media, almost anything at scale that is trying to move people in an anti-systemic, anti-hegemonic direction, the hardest thing is keeping it going financially. That is really a challenge. And I think that is just something that we have to think about, right? We have to think about as a movement in the same way we think about time and, how much time people have to be involved in this, that, and the third, how much money and how do we have an attitude of an equality of sacrifice? For some people, $1,000 a month is nothing. For some people, $1 a month is something. But the person giving $1 a month and the person giving $1,000, if they're all sort of working and organized together towards the same purpose, still builds towards a greater and a bigger goal. And I think people naturally see that in political campaigns, because that's how we're taught to engage in politics in a way that as young people, right? This is legitimate. And of course they need money. And of course you have to give money. And I think we just have to think of everything else like that too.
I just want to add very quickly that I think it's also important that people who are supportive of these media outlets, also do the immaterial basics as well. And some of it, I admit, I've complained to a few folks here and there about is why aren't you making reference to our platform when you're giving your presentation, or use a video from our platform when you're in your classroom, or when you're just giving an interview, give a shout out to Breakthrough News, it's so easy, and we often do it for other outlets, even unconsciously, even in criticism. How often do we criticize, the New York Times or the Washington Post or something like that, and it just recycles their brand, instead of saying, in addition to criticizing them, I also was getting a corrected view of that story from Breakthrough News, and bringing it into our class. So stuff like that, just small things that I think people can do to help these platforms out.
And I mean, that's important. So, and this is always the struggle, right? Because I'm almost, people are going to be mad when I say it, but I'm almost glad we didn't go live, because, there'd be somebody in the chat right now, like, you on YouTube. Like, people, like this never ending contradiction of the reality of living in a capitalist system.
And understanding how it works. Sorry to cut in, Renee, but
no, go ahead.
I hear that. And the person who undoubtedly will now be in the comments commenting on this, and when it's played, I get this. People ask me about this all around the world. Like, can we create our own YouTube? Can we create our own Twitter? Can we create our own thing? And I think there's two aspects to that. And I'll just start with the one thing. And this is what I always say to people when they raise this. Well, like, what are you going to do to help us pay for the server farms? Because honestly, like, the software side of it is not the challenge. Like, to create a platform like a YouTube or a social media, that actually can be done pretty quickly. But the thing is you're going to quickly become a victim of your own success. Because if you create something like that and then 20 million people want to watch it, you have to have a giant server farm and data center that costs tens of millions of dollars. That is like a physical building. That also is like, you have to have that massive like air conditioning in there. So like the energy bill every single year. So it's like, this actually is partially why you're dependent, because the nature of the technology itself makes it very difficult. So like, until you have like $1 billion, you would not actually be able to successfully do this. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't build towards that, but we have to actually think about that as a real goal, right? Like, okay, if we want to be able to have our own YouTube, that means like we need to be able to like have the infrastructure that YouTube has. And YouTube is one of the biggest, richest companies on earth, and it spans the globe. So like, are our international networks strong enough? Are our financial networks strong enough? Is our technical capability strong enough? And if the answer to all three of those things is no, which I think it is, then what is step 1, 2, and 3? And so before we get to step 1, 2, and 3, you got to find whatever you can find to reach people.
But even, I mean, that's a really good point. But even then, there's the immaterial side of this is the conundrum, because this is where the audience is.
Exactly.
So even if you create all that, even if you build the building and with the air conditioning and the server farm, you're still going to have to find a way to drag people over. And so what I've always thought was important to do was to cultivate alternatives for the purposes of communicating with those already in certain levels of organization or political consciousness, as opposed to what is the parallel to organizing the mass version of the media form. That I think would be of value, and I would love to see, to the extent I don't know about it, more development along those lines. But if the conversation is about reaching some sort of sizable audience, this is the trick bag we're in, and they have always been in, by the way. This is not new to this level of sophisticated media technology. This has always been an issue to a certain extent. And so yeah,
and also I just want to say, like, you bring up a good point about the physical structure, right? Because not for nothing, I don't want to be party to another data center. Like, I don't want to I don't want to be a part of building another data center and tearing down 100 acres of trees and all of that, so that we can pollute the air further with things. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So
no, it's a good point, and I think your point, Jared, is also right. Like, sorry to just interject there, Renee. I apologize, but you can see this in right-wing media in a way, where they have created a lot of kind of like Rumble and all these other networks that still, they all are very on like YouTube. And that's why like a lot of like right-wing people don't want to go on some of these platforms. They're like, well, we want to actually reach people, and you have to be where people are already looking in order to bring them in. And so the two things can really only exist sort of in a parallel universe. And I guess this is the question about seizing the means of production. I mean, part of it is, the media, I think, sort of is a part of that in a way. I mean, it's a part of the superstructure, the propaganda apparatus. So the real issue to me is not, if we want to quote Zach De La Rocha from Rage Against the Machine, F the G ride, I want the machines that are making them. Ultimately, like, we need to be taking over 30 Rock. Like the institutions and means of communications need to be seized and used by the people. And I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where we just like, we can contend with them in a dual power sense where we could have millions of people watching us, or the same number watching them. But if we're really like winning, then part of it is not just like having two alternative medias, like the capitalist media and the alternative to capitalist media within capitalist society, but changing capitalist society and having only good media. So it also speaks to our ultimate goals, I think, about where we're trying to reach. Like, I'm not trying to just build something that's like a cool silo to say we have an alternative to CNN. Like, my view is to gain control of the means of information and to use them for positive ends of society. And I think that's another aspect to this too.
And that's why you can't speak after Eugene. I just want to point that out.
And that's the energy I'm talking about, because, I always bring this up. I know I'm a broken record on this, but this was like, with and no disrespect, they were all, many of them at least, well-meaning people, but those media reform conferences I used to go to used to frustrate me to no end, because their tagline was democratize media. And I was like, that's not how it works. You're not going to have a democratic, liberated media environment in this hellscape. Like, there has to be some discussion of political power here, and how are we going to move these conversations from media reform to societal reform? And that was always like a sticking point for me. And so I like that energy. We congratulations on the million, but 10 million, and then to your point, there's a billion English speakers, and then there's this need for the actual assumption of power. That's the other version of Kwame Ture said, I don't want nothing but power. I just want the power. You could have everything else.
A lot of this is a training ground in a way. Like, I've been rereading the Helen Yoff book about the economics of Che Guevara. And the thing that's like, the famous thing about Che when he became the head of the central bank, when Fidel says, I need a good economist. And he raises his hand and they were like, you're an economist? He's like, I thought you said you need a good communist. But like, they had now they had the means of production, but they had to like run it. So this is the training ground for after we win, for when someone is like, yo, who can like get NBC up and running with the revolutionary messages we need on like day 3 after we've taken power. Jared, do you know how to do that? Like, you can get on camera, you can make something happen like that. A lot of this is that. I think it's part of how the working class and oppressed people more broadly are training ourselves to really be able to run society, if we believe that's possible, and that we don't need these capitalist intermediaries, and we don't need just bourgeois credentialing. Like, I have no journalism degree, not that I'm hating on that at all. I'm all for journalism, mass communications, but like, I'm kind of accidentally in journalism, and I'm learning it, from the masters like Dr. Jared Ball and others, of how to really act and do things. But, it's funny. Anyone can do it.
Eugene is doing his Todd Burrows impression. Listen, I'm with Glenn Ford on the journalism degree, even with the PhD, that we don't need journalism degrees. Journalism should be a subset of English, and people should learn how to read and write and do research. And then the journalism part is really just a subset of you just add a couple of principles and guidelines. It's really not that deep. The best part about at least the advanced study of it, because of course journalism schools were founded by newspapers to get someone else to pay for their future staff. But at least at the graduate level study of media and communication, it gets a lot more interesting and exciting. But in terms of journalism, it should be just a subset of writing and research classes, and a couple lectures, couple guidelines, and you're good to go. But yeah, anyway, I like that whole point. This is all a training ground. By the way, I was trying to think just as you were talking, like I've never considered like what was happening in the newsrooms in Havana when Fidel and them were rolling up in there in 59. Like what like like people like you move over and now I'm sitting in here and we're gonna, anyway, that would, but I'm with you on that anyway. Yeah.
It really is when you consider, and Jared used my word, which I always, the conundrum, right? Like you're trying to figure out how do you teach enough people what they need to know in order for them to also feel the need to be invested in the process of changing the system, of completely disintegrating what exists and participating in a process of doing something differently. And it's a rough go, right? Like, I'm no journalist either, right? Like I certainly didn't go to school for this, but I happened into it similar to you because Jared sent me an email and Kamal sent me an email and here we are 86 episodes later and still going, right? And that understanding of, we know that we're existing in a space where we're being allowed to be in this space in a way, right? And so like here, we got demonetized, and that was a very eye-opening experience to be reminded, like, you can only do what we allow you to do, right? Like we're only going to give you but like so much. And I will admit, like, I'm hopeful that at some point, like, YouTube will look around and be like, man, they got a lot of subscribers. We're like losing a lot of the ad revenue, not allowing them to monetize, right? And that they'll like circle back. They let African stream back. So it's like, like obviously like there's a point in which you become financially viable to the person who doesn't want you to exist in a way that they have to allow you to exist, right? And so playing that game is very, very tricky. And it's an awkward conversation, because when people say like, well, how do you deal with this contradiction of having to utilize a system that you're trying to break? Right. And I don't have a good answer aside from, well, what else am I going to use? Right. Like exactly what Jared, like this is where the people are. So you have to use the thing that exists. And I love this idea that you said of like overwhelming the algorithm, right? Like how do you get to a point where the thing that you do is, everything is important when you're trying your best to speak the truth. That's my theory on it, right? Like if you're speaking truth, everything that you're saying is important. But how do you make it important for other people to want the truth, right? Because that's the tricky part. Like a lot of people are perfectly content to be in their bubble and to be on their hamster wheel and to just get by, right? And to just like survive. And, I always remember like, and I don't remember what exactly like the little story was, but about mushrooms, like, hiding in the shadow because, like the minute you pop up, like someone's going to chop your head off. Right. Like, so like that, this whole thing of like, how do you navigate this? And I don't want to ramble too much, but I just, when, and we talked about it a lot, but do you have any sense of like when you're facing this like question of, we're going to do the thing that's probably going to get us in trouble, but we're going to do it because it's the right thing to do and it's the truth, right? Like what is that conversation like on your end as like an independent media source?
Well, it's a great point. There's a number of different aspects maybe to what you're saying that I think are relevant. In terms of sort of, how do you utilize the system? if contradictions are what move the world forward, right? It's how do you how do you use various contradictions to try to find a way to overcome them? Like, why did Ho Chi Minh and Mao in 1945, why were they going out of their way to court the United States and the Roosevelt and Truman administration? It wasn't because they like loved the Roosevelt and Truman administration or that they thought that they were like a good force on earth, but they recognized that the contradiction between US imperialism and the old colonial empires meant that they could actually leverage that relationship to build up their ability to seize power in China and Vietnam. Obviously in China it worked, in Vietnam it did not, and of course the US ended up not supporting them in China. But you know what I'm saying, that they could actually bring themselves to power and transform the world for hundreds of millions of people, the tens of millions of people who had been following them, you know, for all these decades since 1919, 1920, when they had started this struggle against formal colonialism in Vietnam's case, and the sort of informal open door neo-colonialism in China's case, right? Like, and I think that's obviously a much bigger scale than what we're talking about here. But I think about it like that because, you know, sometimes people will actually point that out historically as a sort of an anomaly, but I think you have to understand it from the point of view of how we use contradictions, right? And I think that is the nature of being on a YouTube or using a social media. It's not going to be the end all be all, but it can be something. And those are businesses too. So I think your point, Renee, is correct, right? Like to some degree, capitalism is always looking to capitalize and to monetize on any sentiment amongst the people, anything that will generate money. And I think you can actually see that in the wake of the George Floyd uprising. I mean, as much as everyone made fun of the Kylie Jenner Pepsi thing, like I actually found that to be extremely interesting because I'm like, okay, if Pepsi feels like the best way to sell a soda is to make it seem like it's connected to protests, like obviously their goal is not our goal, but that means that they have perceived something significant in terms of how the 2020 summer was seen amongst the broad masses of people as something that's like totally legitimate and good. And I think that's the question to the point that you're raising about the thing that might get you in trouble, right? As you always have to measure, and you know, Mao said once in 1965, when we can win, we fight. When we can't, we run away. But that basically, like, you have to pick your battles is essentially what he's saying. And he was saying this to the PLO actually at the time, who were meeting with him, that you gotta think about how do you preserve your cadres and your organization, but you also have to think about how you push the envelope a little bit, right? And I think that's the context where they're talking about the abolitionist movement, the civil rights movement. And as you say, Renee, it's a difficult thing to navigate. And it's not something that you always get right either, right? Like that's, I know I keep quoting Lenin here, but what can I say? Is just, I've been reading a lot of Lenin. But this is why he came up with the concept of bending the tree, right? And he would talk about that he would always try to seize kind of the main issue and really like push on that. And then subsequently would come back and be like, well, you know, I did go a little too hard. But you got to understand this is why I went a little too hard. But like, you also got to think about this too, like, and not take what I said in that context as like the gospel truth 100%. I was trying to get this point across. So we're always kind of moving back and forth and navigating and trying to not lapse into either opportunism, which is just, you know, for our own self-aggrandizement, you know, not pushing the envelope at all, or adventurism, which is doing something well beyond what the masses of people you know, think is right. Like not even what they're willing to do, but like what they think is right. Because I think this is the whole issue about consciousness that's important. And the whole concept of like, you know, what Mao also said, right? That the masses are the true heroes and we ourselves are often childish and ignorant, I think is the quote. That really, realistically, the masses of people have a lot of wisdom, right? And even when they are passive, I don't think it's because people don't care. I think it's because people's assessment of what's possible is conservative. Now, their assessment might be one we want to change, but I think even if we say, yes, we want the masses to go from being inert to active, we have to contend with what their response to our tactics and strategy is, right? Like if they feel like, okay, like I'm not 100% rocking with that, doesn't mean that we're 100% wrong, but what are the things that are holding people back from embracing it? And what are the things that maybe we do have wrong? That like people would come more into motion if we did X, Y, and Z. Like these are the types of things that you always have to look at. So that's what we, I think a lot about in BT and Breakthrough News in terms of our thought process is, you know, I always say to folks on staff, like everyone who already agrees with us, which is a lot of people who watch us and like, you know, it's red meat. They like what we have to say. Every one of those people has someone in their life, coworker, friend, family, whoever, who they're trying to talk to them about politics. And the people, it's just, you go nose blind. It's like, my cousin has been saying this to me for like X number of years. Like, I love him, but like, no, this is not it. And I say, I want every breakthrough segment to be the thing where you can go to your cousin and say, okay, you tired of hearing me, but listen to this and then let's talk. So how do we put things in a way that helps people understand that the world can be different? They can live in a different way, but that will require a long-term arduous commitment to change. And like every good thing has gone through a long-term arduous commitment to change. But in a way that also speaks to where they are right now. Like, you got to meet people where they're at, but you got to take them somewhere. So anyway, that's a little bit of how we address that, I think. I don't know if that's what you're looking
No, it's very helpful to me, at least. And I want to take this moment to so you've been reading a lot of Lenin lately. I've been revisiting Fanon, and I'm going to use this as a plug because similarly inspired.
Read, beloved.
We're going to start Monday a 4 and 7 week series in tribute to the 100th birthdays of Fanon and Lumumba. So as Renee set me up beautifully with one of our last guests, feel free to add any reference or discussion that I can clip for those shows to Lumumba and Fanon in future, answers, discussion today. But Fanon, one of the things Fanon was talking about in terms of where the masses of the people were, that I've always liked, is his point about it's the colonial inertia that people often misdefine as apathy. And I think you actually even said it, and maybe even a better way, that it's people's, something to the effect, however you put it, that it's what people think is the possibility has been limited. And again, to Fanon's point, where our dreams for freedom have been disturbed to the point where we're not, so like we anyway, so I like that point, that part of the work here is to push back against some of that inertia and give some people, to your point about the cousin, Mr. Porter used to talk about it in terms of the water cooler, giving people something to say at the water cooler, so that more and more people can have their analysis catch up to what is their underlying attitudes, is what I really think is the issue. Like, I think people just need that information to supplement where I think most of us are already in terms of what the hell is going on here. Minus the 70 so plus million that voted for Trump, I would say at least that. But other than that,
Yeah. But that's another thing to even think about. Like,
no, you're right. Go ahead.
No, I'm glad you're raising it, and because I think a lot of those people did not making it. But like, even if you think about the number of votes Trump got, and you compare it to like the voting age and voting eligible population, but let's just go voting eligible, he actually only won about a third of the voting eligible population, which means the majority of people either voted for Kamala Harris, a third party, or did not vote, who were eligible to vote. So in a way, the Trump movement, which is because of the anti-democratic nature of the US system, now has control of like all levers of power, is a distinctly minority movement. But obviously within that, there's a lot of confusion. People who voted for Kamala Harris thinking she was a real answer. There's a lot of inertia, like people who just didn't vote, which is understandable in a way. But I think we have to actually be more intelligent about this. Like, I think a lot of people always will say like, yeah, people, they don't vote in the hood, like this, people aren't voting, like as if it's a conscious rejection of bourgeois elections. Like, I do kind of an analysis I have a long list of majority Black precincts and counties and things like that I like to look at each election to see what's going on. And South Side of Chicago, where I love the South Side of Chicago, truly like one of my favorite parts of the country, the number of people who vote is like very low. Like, and like best case scenario in a lot of these places, if you reach like 40%, even in a presidential election year, like that's good. You know what I'm saying? And forget the off year elections. And this is not to slight the people in Southside Chicago at all, but just to speak to the consciousness issue, it's not as if all these people are a member of like revolutionary organizations or are, constantly rising up against the evils of the Chicago police, all these different factors. So people are recognizing a certain relevance, that a certain thing that the election is not relevant to them, but that's not the same thing as a grounded critique that is of the election system. Now, some people do have that critique and don't vote. some people do have that critique, but also think that what they do doesn't matter, which is why not only do they not vote, they don't do anything else. Other people maybe think I would vote, but the people aren't like good. So why would I go out and do that? So it's like there's a whole range of different levels of consciousness that I think sometimes people want to say, oh, well, this shows like, you know, poor working class Black people in the most oppressed community don't, you know, aren't for the system, which means that like all we got to do is go and hand them a leaflet about revolution or like put ourselves on Instagram and then they're going to like rally to our cause. But it's not, it's complex. So anyway, I just say that to say about, you know, the range of how we look at how voting is also an important measure, I think, of where people are at, the different forms of contradictions that, you know, exist in both people's consciousness and life. And then we have to move from there to try to organize people more effectively. So I don't even really know 100% where I was going with that, but I just think it's an important factor about like where we're at and about how we measure and think about consciousness.
Right. And it's important because on top of that, you also have a media blackout, essentially, of everything that is not red or blue. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so on top of everything else, the amount of people, like I would be in a room and I would say Claudia de la Cruz and no one would know what I was talking about, right? And so you're fighting that battle on top of everything else. And, you know, one of the arguments that we have often on Saturdays, and I don't even know if it's actually an argument because Jared agrees with me and I always pull Geechian when we're talking third party politics and he usually agrees with me, is, you know, this another conundrum. Like, you know, you can say like voting doesn't matter and electoral politics is stupid and, you know, you're never going to get anywhere. But then in not participating, you are leaving the fate of all of those decisions to the very people that you don't want to be in charge of those decisions. And so how do you, you know, like, how do you get that to work? Like, how do you force a system to change when you're not part of the system? And then how do you also like acknowledge like being part of the system often doesn't work? Like when you look at the people who, you know, campaigned on change or campaigned on being like, you know, the voice of the people and, you know, all these things, and then they get there and they become exactly what you feared they were going to become, which is useless, right? Like the rest of the people involved. And so there's always this circling of the wagon on electoral politics of like, how do you really deal with this? Because it's a truth. Like the truth is, in very many ways, electoral politics doesn't change anything, but it's also very truthful to say like the reason electoral politics can never change anything is because the majority of people don't participate. And so you have real voices of real people who really want to see things be different, but they're either not participating or they're not being allowed to participate in a way that could actually, you know, result in anything significant happening. And I just very quickly want to say, like, you know, you're pointing out people's kind of like understanding the conservative idea of like, you know, there's not much I can do. So I just, you know, I'm just going to keep plugging along, right? Like that very much like, you know, you have people who say things like, well, it's just human nature that these things happen. Like, you know, like this idea that you can't really force change because of whatever thing that you've decided is the factor, right? And I'm fascinated by the conundrum in general with that whole thing. But I have another topic that I want to make sure we don't get to. I want to make sure we don't run out of time. But before we go there, you said you've used the term the left, right? Mm-hmm. And people always say like define the left. And I don't really have a definition because I don't know that the left actually exists. Like it's nice to say the left, but of course, depending on who you're talking to, like somebody thinks AOC is on the left and I highly disagree with that, right? And so like, can you talk about how, like, in your space, in your media space, how do you deal with this idea of a left and what you would want the left to be, but what the reality is of what the left is? And if you could throw in, if you have a means to define the left, that would be Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've asked you this before, so I love a revisit to the discussion of defining the left. Yes, it's very important. Yes.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's key. I mean, the thing is we have to recognize that the left, like the reason why we always lapse into saying it is that it's a historical phenomenon, right? Like it's not necessarily something that is like sort of self-declared by, us. And of course, the whole thing about the left is we're all trying to exclude people we don't, feel are right from who we define. But I think if we understand that as a historical phenomenon, it becomes a little bit easier, right? Like I mean, I don't want to go on some long discourse, but of course, the whole term the left comes from the French Revolution, right? And it has the context of where people sat in the Estates General and the National Assembly, and basically how close or how far they were from the king and royalism, or after the king was deposed, the most conservative manifestations of what the French Revolution should look at. So like the most against the king and the more extreme, we're sitting on the left, and many of them high up. That's why they also called the Montagnards. And that's where it comes from, right? And I think so. It's a historical form that emerges from the creation of a contestation and a polarization within capitalism between the sort of the more conservative and the more expansive views of what this new untested society emerging from feudalism should look like. So I would say I think the left is anybody with some critique of capitalism in a way in this context. Now that can be a liberal critique, it can be a reformist critique, it can be a revolutionary critique, it can be different ways. But that's why we constantly use the term the left, and it's kind of amorphous because that level of that critique means that people often end up in the same place. Like for instance, to say that every single person so that healthcare should be decommodified, right? Like that is a position that is held by AOC and Bernie Sanders, and it's a position that's held by most revolutionaries. But from the point of view of AOC and Bernie Sanders, like that's the goal in and of itself, is that capitalism has problems, but that you can sort of tweak the system and you could, move beyond a capitalist logic in certain key areas, but keep it in other areas, and then that's just enough. Where other people are going to say, of course, part of the reason why you don't have universal health care is because to just be decommodifying huge ranges of the economy starts to call capitalism into question, rightfully so. And then the question becomes, should you actually have capitalism, and do you need a new system? But nonetheless, if there's a Medicare for all rally, you might still have revolutionaries and reformists show up at the same place. So I think in many ways, the key question for me is not defining the left, but defining the goal. And is the goal to have the basic needs and wants, right, of all people to be met in a society where we can easily do that? And if the answer is yes, can you do that under capitalism, or do you need a new system? And I think that is, to me, the more functional divide: revolution versus reform. Like, are we for revolution or are we for reform? Like, in a way, yeah, sure, we're all on the left and we have similar sensibilities and we go to similar protests and we read similar books and all these things. And that's fine and good, because it's a historical product of a struggle that began at the beginning of capitalism about how to define capitalist society, that over time also developed within it a strong cohort of people who recognized you had to move beyond capitalism to do the good things that, many sort of capitalist ideologues held out would come in this new society, like freedom, liberty, all these things didn't mean freedom and liberty for the poorest people or change it. And so that's how the left, starts to develop in the sense that we think of it, of socialism and communism and so on and so forth. But anyway, my general feeling is, are we revolutionaries or are we reformists? And how do we look at the end goal? And then how does that affect our tactics and our strategy and our organization, and how do people look at it? So, anyway, that's maybe a brief way of looking at that.
No, that makes sense. And thank you. Jared, did you have anything? Because I'm going to ask Eugene here to take off his media hat in a second and put on his PSL organizer third-party hat.
Do your thing. As I said in our email, if there's time, I have that one other question.
Why don't you ask that question first, and then we can shift to the PSL questions.
All right, and maybe the PSL's analysis will help me get clear on this. So as I said, I revisited your intro to this really great book, The Black Belt Thesis, A Reader. And because I had just finished reviewing this Crusader essay from Robert Williams, where he's talking about and the part I'm focused on is that he's talking about his in the memoir that just came out, which is great. He talks about in a discussion with one of the Cuban revolutionaries who's telling him, Williams, your focus on Black separation, Black nationalism, even in its revolutionary character, is missing the point. You need to work with the white workers and have a socialist revolution. And in your introduction, you are talking about a number of important things, including the Communist Party's influence on the concept of a nation within a nation. And now I'm losing track of my own. Let me go find my email real quick. But the point I wanted.
Well, I remember it.
Good, because the struggle I'm having is when I think about, I have this tendency, the nationalism thing has to happen. The Black nation has to free itself. But then if it frees itself within this society, then as I said in the email, then I feel like we're just setting ourselves up to be Palestine, which as we see is not. But then when Robert Williams makes his point about, look, man, white workers, it's not going to happen. They're not set up to. I'm moved by that. So I keep going back and forth. So there you go. So as you said, you remember the email probably better than I do.
No, well, it's a good question. I mean, and I think there's different facets to it. I mean, obviously, Black people are a nation in the United States. And from the point of view of the right of self-determination, if all Black people did want to set up a separate country within the Black Belt South, I think that would be obviously historically and morally justified given everything that's taken place. So the real question then just becomes, and this is the question of the Black Belt thesis in and of itself, is practically, is that the route to like Black liberation? And I think that means that we have to think like, what does that actually mean? And what is the relationship of the Black nation to the sort of broader means of production, both in the US context and the global context? Because that's the other challenge that we have too here, I think, in how the question is developing. I mean, it's something that I think Huey Newton was trying to get at with the intercommunalism discussion is, like capitalism is totally globalized, and like labor and the production, like the most important humanity, like the most foundational thing we do as humanity is reproduce ourselves, right? Is like doing the things that we need to do to keep society going. So production now is totally globalized. It's totally cross borders. It's only when people want to come cross borders when it's a problem. When it's capital, it's nothing. So like for the Black nation in America, when we think about our oppression, because like our liberation is relevant to our oppression, when we think about how almost everything bad is disproportionately Black, is there a solution to those problems that doesn't involve the Black nation having, I would argue, preferential access to the ability to shape how the means of production in society as a whole, both in the sort of North American context and the global context, is working to address those issues specifically, right? And I think the answer to that question is that it is not. I think that really there is no way, when you think about the like how oppressed Black people really are. Like when we think about, I think I saw something the other day that Black people are like almost 3 times as likely as to die of stomach, or 3 times more likely to die of like stomach cancer than white people, which I don't know why I was surprised at that, but it just felt like, damn, even stomach cancer, like every single bad thing.
Yeah.
Which means we'd have to totally overturn our healthcare system. But as someone then pointed out to me, they were like, but if you're going to totally overturn the healthcare system, you also have to totally overturn the education system, because so many of the disparities in like why Black women are having these high rates of maternal deaths, like even billionaires like Serena Williams are saying doctors don't believe her, like the depth of racism in the medical profession. Like we actually have to start at the kindergarten level to start preparing people, because we're not preparing them now to go into these jobs, to be in the healthcare field, to do all these things. We got a healthcare system, the educational system, all these different factors. Like what happens then if we want to have universal healthcare? That would definitely help poor Black people in Mississippi. But then, the 120 Black people living in Jackson working for Allstate Insurance or whatever, or Aflac, like what happens to them if we eliminate their job, and how do we reintegrate them in? Like, I think the type of resources that are required there can only happen in a sort of broader socialist context where you have access to the whole the whole means of production to address these issues, but in a preferential way, which I think speaks to the sort of broader issue. I mean, one of the things we point out in Socialist Reconstruction, the PSL book, is one of the dumbest things about America is how the municipalities and regions are set up. Like, you know, having lived in DC for many years, in New York for 5 years, it's like, how is it possible that like northern New Jersey, Connecticut, these parts of New York are 3 different states? Like you have Maryland, DC, Virginia, when it's all one thing and it's one economic unit, and it's like these totally arbitrary things. So one of these factors is the Black Belt. Like there's a case to be made from my point of view that the sort of Black Belt South and the Black Belt border region maybe should be one unit, right? Like one kind of geographical unit. I'm not saying it has to be that way. I think Black people have to discuss it and decide. But like in terms of how do you actually structure a revolutionary society in a way that allows for a certain preferential set of access, there's different ways you can look at that. But one might be actually having like a Black nation be its own sort of geographical unit and have access to resources in a way that does that. But then that leaves the question of like, what about Detroit, which is I think the 3rd blackest city in America, like 83% Black, but obviously not in the South, not in the Black Belt, surrounded by a county that's not majority Black. Like, you know, how do you address that geographic question too? Which then again, to me, speaks to this broader issue, which is why another thing we put out in Socialist Reconstruction is, you know, revisiting the Soviet of nationalities from the USSR. And not that we want to just copy things from the Soviet Union, which was very different from the United States, but like to have a body that's basically Blacks and Native Americans, that like any law or anything that's passed or any money that's spent, like they got to co-sign it. You know what I mean? Like it can't move forward without that. Like, how do you create a real sense of checks and balances? So that's just one thing. But I think the broader point you're raising about Robert Williams, which is kind of separate from my point, because I'm talking kind of post-revolution, assuming a multinational revolution is possible. He's sort of saying that that's not possible. And, you know, look, you know, I think the record is mixed, obviously. And it's not great for white workers in many ways. And I think, you know, the sort of anyone who's serious about revolution has to recognize that the impact of white supremacy and racism has probably been the main stumbling block to really going where we needed to go. But I would also say it's not nothing. I mean, you know, I had the opportunity to teach at the People's Forum last summer about the issue of the Civil War and Reconstruction. And one of the points I raised up was the Iron Brigade from Wisconsin, which, you know, had some of in the 1st Minnesota, which had some of the biggest losses of troops in Gettysburg. And actually prior to that fought pretty hard. And the point I was noting is, you know, these people, some of them I'm sure were racist. I mean, no doubt about that. But when you actually dug deep, you could see like the 2nd Wisconsin was recruiting a lot of people from Racine, which was a hotbed of abolitionism. And not that long before, it had one of the more interesting aspects of, and the relationship between Racine and also Canada and the Underground Railroad, and Black-led but multinational efforts by abolitionist groups to prevent the return of fugitive slaves, for instance, was huge in Racine. And in fact, there had been a big one involving thousands of people. You know, Minnesota, which has its own history, but one of the states that, a lot of white racists, no doubt about that, and a lot of racism towards Native Americans, straight up genocide, but nonetheless, also in and of itself, a stronghold of abolition. So you think about like why these people, in the context of a battle like Gettysburg, when the 1st Minnesota at Cemetery Ridge leads a suicidal charge against the Alabama troops and has almost their entire unit eviscerated. Like, why would you do that if you didn't care at all about the issues at stake? Now, some people, I'm sure, were just selfish anti-slavery people who hated Blacks and were like, yeah, we just don't like slavery expanding because it's not good for us economically. But when you look at the history of the abolitionist movement in those areas, some of those people undoubtedly were going to fight and to die because they were actually against slavery and felt like it needed to end and were a part of this broader space that was there. And I think, as Manisha Sina has revealed for us in her book about abolition, which is so important, the abolitionist movement was primarily working class. So anyway, I just say all that to say, you know, I could point out other different things and I could point out things with a mixed reality, but I actually think that the record, while not what we need, opens up the possibility. I mean, you could also talk about the United Mine Workers and the complicated history of white and Black workers in Alabama, for instance, and the mines, where it was the only integrated institution in the Jim Crow South at that time in that state. and it had a lot of contradictions and a lot of racism wrapped up in it, but there was a certain possibility there that led to certain things that have happened. I think the growth of the communist movement in the United States actually speaks to that as well. I mean, whatever you might say, the fact that this group of communists were able to lead hundreds of thousands of people throughout the 30s in a, integrated way that lifted up a lot of Black leadership that never would. I mean, Claudia Jones, Maud White, Paul Robeson, James Ford, Claude Lightfoot, so many different people who, never would have had a chance in any other context. So anyway, it's not that it's not difficult or that there aren't a lot of negative reactions or things that would make us skeptical. And Robert Williams, by the way, who organized in World War II with the Communist Party and other left forces in the war factories in Detroit. So someone speaking from a level of experience, and I don't want to discount that, but I also think when we look at the whole historical record, there's more possibilities. But then I also think, and I'll just stop here, based on my very first point, which is the need for the Black nation to insert its own vision of liberation into a sense of reality, which I think does require socialism, not just in the United States, but on a worldwide scale, also implies that even if the record is worse than I'm saying it, we have to come up with some way to address this issue. And I think the history of the Black liberation movement shows that. Even Marcus Garvey meeting with the Ku Klux Klan, which, I think people are constantly, saying, oh, wow, how terrible. And yeah, like how terrible, what a terrible concept. But you can see his thinking is, well, in America is so racist, but Blacks are still the minority. So there's really no way to build a huge mass movement of Black people without addressing the issue of race relations in one way or another. And either you're going to address it in a positive sense, like let's win over white people, or you're going to address it in a negative sense and say, we'll never win them over, but maybe we can make a modus vivendi with the organizations they do support to create more space for us to organize. So no matter how people have answered the question over the years, everyone has had to grapple with the question of multinational unity, and no one has been able to escape it who's really organized Black people at scale.
Just quickly, are you aware did Garvey ever come back and regret that meeting? I know, because didn't Malcolm say he regretted meeting with the Klan after he did it? Did Garvey ever?
Yeah, Malcolm said he regretted it and that it was never serious. I can never remember reading anything about Garvey regretting it, but it never went anywhere, which I think in and of itself kind of speaks to it. He never really, I think it was 24. It was kind of like one meeting and that was kind of it. It was never a big thrust. So I think people probably make too much out of it in a way. And I think that was Malcolm's point too, is that it was never a deep, serious relationship, but that he did regret it. But at the very least, I don't think Garvey was thinking it was truly the path, but he had the meeting to at least explore it.
So this fascinates me. And I just lied, y'all, because your whole answer just now has sent me down a hole, because I was mad at you for a little while. I think I mentioned this once to Jared, because you answered a question one time and I was like, did he just imply that we should try and ignore racism? And then I had to circle back and make sure that I understood exactly what you were saying, to be clear, because I think this is also, this big tent question, right? I am a Green Party member, but I voted for Claudia last year, right? And so, and one of my efforts in New Jersey has been to work with PSL New Jersey, because I feel like it's really important, as people who are struggling towards socialism and actual change, that we not be in conflict with each other, right? And that if for example, if in the future PSL New Jersey decides that they're going to run somebody in District 3 and that person is a good candidate, we shouldn't be running anybody in District 3, right? Let's not split up that vote. How about we all get behind the person who's going to do the best thing for the people that are in that community? So I say all that to say that one of the arguments that I often have, unfortunately, and this has nothing to do with PSL, this is just inside inside Green Party spaces at times, is this whole idea of well, you can't limit who you work with. And so, I think at least Jared knows at this point that I am not one to hold punches. And so the last person who made mention of that, my response was, you are speaking exactly like someone who's never been called the N-word inside of a big tent. It's really easy to tell me I'm wrong to not embrace the big tent when you're never going to be harmed by whatever activity happens within that tent when you allow anybody in despite whatever their convictions are. And so this, for me, what you just explained about having to grapple with it is such an important conversation, because it's not about just simply, and I think people misunderstand me a lot, because it's not about just simply dismissing people because you assume that they're racist, right? It is about trying to actually assess where someone's level of racism is going to be a problem within your organizing space, and not allowing that harm to come into your organizing space. And also to understand, like, who can you have these conversations with, right? Because not everybody who comes to the table with racist ideologies is, sometimes it's just because they don't, you know what you know, right? And you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes you really don't know what you don't know, right? And so there are all these concepts that come into play when you're dealing with this. And it's not just about like being overly sensitive and all these things, but actually trying to mitigate like the potential of harm that comes when people just simply don't respect you based simply on the amount of melanin you carry, right? And so I want to thank you for clarifying that, because it's something that has lived in the back of my mind that I basically rectified in watching you in other spaces. And I was like, okay, he didn't say what I thought he said. It's all good. But I appreciate that. And it's important. It's important that people understand that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And I'd say two things. Yeah, there's got to be some red lines. And ultimately, you're never going to build, like, there's no way to, in the same way I said there's no way to sort of avoid the question of multinational unity, there's no way to avoid the question of racism and white supremacy. And so ultimately, like, you're never going to build any true unity if you allow like backsliding on that issue. And I think you have to have some red lines in terms of where you do it. And everything doesn't have to happen in the same place. Like the spaces where, like inside of a revolutionary organization, you cannot be racist. I mean, that's it. Like you have to be 100% opposed to all manifestations of racism and national oppression and white supremacy at all times. Maybe like in a union, there's more leeway to kind of work with people and kind of see if you could shape it and change it. Like there's different elements of that. And I think to your point, Renee, there are some people who, like with the right information, the right knowledge, will change their attitudes. There are some people who will not. And then we'll have to try to exclude them from all spaces, because anyone who's bringing racism into the labor movement is actually hurting, not helping. And they're making it more difficult to organize workers. But at least maybe that's a space you can give people a chance. But you have to be able to educate them about this issue. You have to be able to let them know why, this is something that's totally unacceptable in that context. And I feel this is the challenge that we face, is how to convince people that like racism and white supremacy, even if you're white, like there's privilege is all relative. So like, of course there is relative privilege to being white in America. There's no doubt about that. Always has been. And that's partially why it works, but it is relative. And I think helping people understand that level of relativity and why their own sense of, oh, we're doing better is in and of itself kind of a castle built on sand that is designed to facilitate their further exploitation, in fact, and that some people are kind of laughing all the way to the bank that they really think they're getting something off the top of this. But that's a difficult question. But to go back, and I'll just close here, since I'm just going to keep this theme going of just constantly quoting Lenin. But the whole reason, and I'm glad you brought the Black Belt Thesis reader, Jared, because as you'll know from my introduction, one of the points I make is, in a way, taking this question seriously was sort of imposed on the U.S. Communist Party by the Bolsheviks and by the Comintern. And it was imposed because, Russia was called the prison house of nations. There's 110 oppressed nations. And their entire revolutionary strategy was like uncompromising struggle against national oppression. In 1913, Lenin writes his first thing where he says Black people are a nation in America, which, by the way, he was basing on census documents he was reading about Black people in the U.S. South that had been compiled by W.E.B. Du Bois, who was leading the research section in the 1910 census about Black people in the South. So an interesting connection there between Du Bois and Lenin in their own thought process. But that ultimately you would never succeed without an uncompromising struggle against national oppression. And that was like, for them, insane that the communist movement in America didn't immediately recognize that and didn't basically turn a huge amount of their effort into addressing this. And so, because of the nature of how the Comintern worked, they just kind of forced them to. That's its own conversation. But, it obviously was a good idea, and it was obviously a good point. And I think that's a good understanding that they actually did succeed in uniting a huge number of oppressed nationalities with a large number of workers from an oppressor nationality, but only because their struggle was like totally uncompromising, and they were, totally unwilling to bend on that, and were aggressively promoting and pushing to people who were Russian, like, you have absolutely nothing to gain, and you are only helping further your own reactionary oppression under czarist despotism by embracing any form of prejudice or division between people who are from different ethnicities and nationalities. So I think we have to have that consciousness as we move forward.
I know we got to move on, but I just want to shout this out again. I really was enjoying the reread this morning, and you pack a lot of history into that intro. In fact, we should probably have you come back just to talk about what's in this intro, because not only the Du Bois and Lenin connection, you got a Garvey and Lenin connection that I certainly forgot about again. And then I was really upset, and we can leave it here, because that Warren Beatty movie with John, about John Reed says nothing about his letter to Lenin about nationalism and Lenin's support for Garvey and Garvey's support for Lenin and the Bolsheviks and all. That would have been a great piece to add.
It would have been a great scene. Yeah, especially if you read what
he long. Add one little scene.
And especially if you read what John Reed said too, because it's actually totally fantastical, but he's basically just like, Black people are the most revolutionary. They're super organized. They're armed and ready to go. They're like in the South, ready to move. So it actually did not comport to 100% where we were, but the spirit of it was so fantastic that like it would make such a great movie scene. And it speaks to John Reed, who he was, and his own conception that has also sort of whited out in terms of his history, his own view as one of the most famous American revolutionaries and communists, of like how it was going to happen, that it was never going to happen unless like Black people were playing a key role, and that everyone around the world should be paying super close attention to the Black struggle and supporting it. So I feel like that, would have been great. Well, next time I see Warren Beatty's dead now, but anyone else who was in that movie, I'll
did
try to.
Did Warren Beatty die? Yeah, I guess he did. Yeah,
didn't he? Yeah. Is he still alive? I don't know. I always forget now.
I think he did.
He did. All right. Well, whatever. Whoever's, whenever they're talking about making, Reds Part 2.
Yeah. All right. So I do want to make sure that I squeeze.
No, he's still alive. I'm sorry.
Is he really?
I just don't want to kill him. It says here he's 88 years old and born in 1937, so he's still hanging on. So Warren.
What's up? We're not even going to talk about Bulworth here, but we're going to have to get to that too.
Oh my God. Not
all right. So very quickly, two things.
Don't be no ghost. Sorry, that's my bad. That's Baraka's line in that movie. My bad.
Jared, at some point, if you will please add the petition that's in. So the last piece that you all did on Breakthrough that I watched, I actually caught this morning, was the anti-genocide petition. And you brought a young lady on for Students for Palestine, who, if you could connect us to her, I would love to have that conversation with her also. But if we could promote this petition, I do think it's, I think what she said about like this being the written record of saying, I am not in support of this thing, right? And I think that was it was such a powerful way to kind of couch why they decided to do a petition. And you spoke about, also that like people get tired, right? The marching, the rallying, that all these things, and you start to feel a little bit like, you're doing all these things and where is it going? But the ability to have a written record of where you stood on this, I agree 100%. Like it's something that I think people should be aware of. And if I hadn't watched Breakthrough News, I wouldn't have known that the petition existed. So see, there you go. Right.
But where's this petition? Is it in the run sheet already?
It's in the run sheet. Man, it's in the run sheet, man.
So I'm just saying, where though? Where
it says anti-genocide pledge.
Oh, the pledge. Well, you kept saying petition. I was looking for the word petition.
Apologies. The pledge. And so you see how Jared be trying to check me, Eugene.
I'm just trying to keep up. This is the pledge. I will definitely make sure it's in the show description, the anti-genocide pledge.
Yes. And you know, this brings me to your work with PSL. And you know, it has been something to watch. Like I'll attend rallies sometimes just because I will admit I'm one of these people who also has a rough time with the rally and the march and the whole, like I feel like sometimes like I go to make sure that I'm a presence if I can do it. But a lot of times I'm like, I just can't, like I can't do another like stand around while there's so much devastation happening. And maybe it's something about my mindset that I have to work on with that. But can you talk a little bit about, you know, PSL's work as an organization, right? Because I'm always amazed when I get to a place and there's like 50 signs pre-made and everybody's ready to go. And there's a whole setup. And I'm like, man, they get it together every single time. So can you talk about that a little bit? Just so people understand, like, this is a process, right? And part of this process is being able to gather people and to have these moments where you get everybody on board with something.
Yeah. No, I mean, you know, look, I think there's a number of different questions kind of nested within there. And I think the point you're raising in terms of, you know, rallies and marches and different things like that. I mean, you know, there's an element to when you really have your eyes open to everything that's going on around you, like, you know, you can't really unring that bell. And when you see the level of urgency with which things need to change, like, you want things to change right away. And I think that's not bad. That's good. I mean, I think that's people want to, you know, find the most effective way to address and to push forward change. But if it was just an issue of sort of individual and even small group collective will, you know, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. You know, I think we would have already solved it. We would have already overturned it. We would have already moved past it. But the reality is, and this is the tricky thing, and it's an element I think about our organizing as PSL is, you know, most of the people who join the PSL have reached a, you know, pretty high state of consciousness in the sense of, you know, the nature of capitalism, the understanding of the state, how socialism is the answer, that, you know, you can't just build socialism within the existing state. Like, you have to have a new society that's kind of built from the ground up in terms of institutions and structures to facilitate that kind of change. And then oftentimes we're basically saying, all right, we now need to go back and organize people who don't know a lot about this and who aren't involved in this context. And I think that this is, like, if you look at a demonstration or a rally, like, that's honestly just a form of political education / propaganda, right? In the same way, you know, a newspaper is, or in the same way a video can be in different ways. Like, it's a way to manifest in public a certain amount of views, or to manifest in public a view of a certain issue that other people are going to be able to see, to engage with, and hopefully to become involved in. And I think when you look at it like that, like, the purpose in some ways is not that any individual sort of act or tactic is going to be the thing that changes everything, but that in the course of a long sort of process, as you point out, although the process, how long or how short it is also not really determined by you, right? Like, I often point out in the first Chinese Revolution, which a lot of people don't know about, in the mid-20s, you know, before it erupted, like a week before, there were like 900 communists or something like that. And then, like, you know, a year later, they were leading hundreds of thousands of people in like revolutionary based zones. Like, they weren't really prepared or ready for that in a sense, or predicting that, but it happened because the objective conditions are relevant. So I also think that we shouldn't put a time scale on something. The question is how well prepared are you going to be in the context of many things in society that you can't really change? And I think in that role, you have to assemble to really move things. I mean, like I said, the Lenin's point, you know, earlier, the sectarians think of moving hundreds of thousands, revolutionaries have to think in tens of millions. That's from left-wing communism, where he also says that, you know, as long as the task is assembling the vanguard, first duty or first priority goes to propaganda, which is an interesting factor. But I think the point that he's basically making is, to be able to move tens of millions of people, you have to be able to gather within you, you know, a significant representative subset of individuals from across the working class and oppressed communities, and, you know, use their collective human and material resources to be able to build a force that can really intervene in a real way in the various contradictions that are breaking out into society and try to find a way to then move the struggle forward in one way or another. And I think if you look at the history of, say, the abolitionist movement, which is, I think, a good one for revolutionaries in the United States, you talk about something that went from the margins to the center of society. For a good chunk of that, like, no one really cared what they were doing. You know what I mean? They were constantly petitioning, constantly doing this, constantly doing that. And slavery, in fact, the slave owners' hold of the government only became more significant. Like in 1850, when you're 10 years away from the Civil War, 13 years away from the Emancipation Proclamation, which we're, by the way, in the 160th anniversary of this year, slave owners had never been more powerful in terms of their control of the government. I mean, the Compromise of Missouri of 1850, the extension of the Fugitive Slave Act, all of that, like it didn't really look like slavery was weak. It actually looked like it was very, very strong. But the sort of tectonic plates underneath it were shifting in many different ways that you couldn't see. And the abolitionist movement was able to step in and make big interventions in contradictions that took place. So like the Liberty Party in 1848 was like significant in one region, but not that significant. People said the same thing about third parties about them now, but it also opened up the space to create more different interventions in a third party vein that helped break apart the two major parties and actually create a new political dispensation that allowed ultimately the abolition of slavery to take place, right? So a lot of what is done is the work of actually cultivating and building the institutions and the organizations that can move tens of millions of people, which means a lot of grassroots work, educational work, a lot of repetitive things, and not looking at the tactic as the end all be all. That to me is the biggest problem on the quote unquote left. And we're back there at that conversation, is 99% of the discussion on the left is not actually about strategy. It's about tactics. Should we like vote third party? Should we have demonstrations? Should we do something else? Like all these different things. And it never starts from, well, what is the goal? And if the goal is to overturn society, and we know we need tens of millions of people to build a new society where everyone has human dignity, then we have to be able to move at least tens of thousands of people to believe that they want to dedicate a significant amount of their life to making that possible. And then those people, that vanguard force, has to then convince tens of millions of other people that they should, in fact, embrace this and make a move. And I think a lot of times, again, once you know it and you see and feel the urgency, you want to just will it to be. And you feel like if you can find the right tactic and work hard enough around that tactic, you're going to succeed. But I personally think, and this goes back to the importance of media, like we have to recognize we're also rebuilding from a very low level. And we don't even have the tens of thousands really yet that we need to move the tens of millions. So in the PSL, that's our goal, is to try to identify as many people as we can who want to struggle for socialism in this society and recognize the need for a revolution to change things, and to then engage in activities that allow us to exploit the existing contradictions that exist in society to try to reach as many more people as we can, and to try to build up a force that can actually intervene in a real way. And I think that can be frustrating, trying, and difficult. But I think when we look at every revolutionary process that's ever taken place, there's always a range of tactics. And when you look back on it from 100 years later or whatever, that's what you see. You don't see that it was one thing. You see it was a multiplicity of things. But I think the most important factor that you always see is that they had strong organization that was devoted to the goal, that was also not cavalier about, allowing itself to be destroyed in crucial moments, and was trying to preserve itself through the ups and downs of the long haul. Like all these things are general principles. So now I'm really rambling, but I guess that's my thought about that.
That was perfect. And this is going to be the last bit because our young people are here, and I want to make sure that we give enough time to talk about the Gen Z panel tomorrow, and hopefully you still have a few minutes to kind of sit and listen to them chat. But I just want, I will, and I don't know if this is going to end up being an uncomfortable question, but I will feel remiss if I don't ask it, because it's been a conversation in the Discord, this issue with Elias Rodriguez and what happened, and PSL came forward with their statement. I wouldn't say it was really a distance. Like, I don't like the word distancing. Like, I feel like it was just a clarification of points of like, here's when he was involved with PSL. This is how long it's been. I think people took issue with, we don't condone, like, this whole conversation. And what what I'd like to try and encourage people to do is to understand that PSL is a large organization, right? There's a lot of y'all, right? There's like a massive group of people. And so for an organization to speak widely for a large group of people, I think there has to be kind of some, I don't know the best word to use, but there has to be a way to do that where you're allowed to keep moving forward, right? And I feel like, you know, the right and the Fox Newses and the Newsweeks, and like they've really latched on to this whole, you know, he participated in a few marches. And I feel like part of the goal in that is to shift winds, right? To make it seem as if like PSL is this crazy like white left wing organization that's supporting terrorism, you know, like this whole thing that they're about to do.
The new Antifa.
Right. And so I wasn't offended at all by the statement. I didn't think it was like wildly like, oh, how could they do this? Like, you know, but I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to kind of just speak to how, you know, like basically like how this happened and how this works, so people understand like there has to be also like a understanding that you have to be able to move forward. So you have to look at things strategically. Like, is this going to be something that's going to prevent us from moving forward? And how do we work against that flow to make sure that we can continue to exist, which is kind of in my brain how some of this transpired. And then once you end that, we'll bring the young people up.
Yeah, well, I'll just say briefly, and you know, I think, you know, hopefully we'll continue to talk about this issue. You know, yes, I think your point is correct. One was to just clarify the record, because, you know, a lot of these right wing and other individuals were trying to, you know, suggest a relationship that was not real. And as we've seen from some text messages of his that were released by the journalist Kim Klippenstein, he didn't really like the PSL either. So some of that is to clarify the fact that this is undoubtedly being used to create a right wing campaign to try to do, you know, anything they can to destroy any entity that exists in the United States that has been at all effective in building opposition to the genocide in Gaza and helping to change people's minds around Israel, like that, what they're doing in Gaza specifically and what they've been doing, you know, since 1917, essentially, is not legitimate. This entire occupation is illegitimate, and that Palestinian people are simply just responding to their own occupation. But I think the thing I'll just say, and I'll just close here, I mean, we have said from the very beginning as the PSL since October 7th, and I think many of the people criticizing that statement have been criticizing us since then, because our point has been from the beginning, we believe that the most effective way to move forward the struggle is to build a mass movement, you know, whether it's around protests, divestment, or the different things that we have done and supported, that will try to take advantage of the existing political contradictions in America to try to shift the relationship of forces inside the body politic, to open up more space, to change the policies around Palestine, hopefully, to end the genocide. But that ultimately we don't, you know, but that's what we've argued. So why would we change our position all of a sudden now? I mean, we've always made this point. And it's not that this is some new thing that we've never said. I mean, our entire position has always been to build a mass legal movement. And some people don't like that. Some people feel we're not doing the right thing, and that's up to them. But we feel we are doing the right thing, and that by, you know, taking a position around building mass opposition to genocide and pursuing, you know, the tactics that we feel are appropriate, that we're moving things forward. So some people are just going to not accept that. And I hope that, you know, in the next coming months, there'll be increased dialogue in the movement about how we do move forward. But I think that's the genesis of that statement. And that's, you know, why we are. I think we're being very consistent when where we've been since the end of 2023. I
appreciate you.
And thanks for that, Renee. I forgot all about that. I forgot that whole story. And
here's what I didn't want was I didn't want to get barked at in the Discord. Like, y'all didn't even ask the question. So I wanted to
I'm glad you did. I would have wanted to remember.
And I do, yeah. And I think I like Eugene is open door. when you're ready to come back, because there's a whole 4 hours we could talk about PSL and the organizing and the goals and things that I would love for us to get to.
Because I did notice in the reporting, they were quick to say that they said he was to make the connection in the press, and then to quote him as saying something in Liberation News. I was like, oh, that's you guys there.
Yeah. Well, I guess the one thing I will say, and I will just say this: if everything we have done, and it's not just the PSL, it's all of the partners we've participated in. I just want to, thank everyone from, the Palestinian Youth Movement to, American Muslims for Palestine and others who've played it's not just us who have built these protests and these demonstrations and other things like that. But if it was so ineffective, why do the Zionists and the right wing seem to feel that it's so worth crushing? Obviously, people with that.
There you go.
And again, whatever people think about Rodriguez's actions, they're in response to the Zionist occupation, not to what the PSL is doing. So if whether however you want to interpret that alleged action, I mean it's that's the font of the problem. Like it's not. Yeah. So anyway, all right. Okay.
All right. So if we could bring the young people up, and I apologize, they've been waiting.
Sure.
They've been so patiently waiting behind the scenes.
I only see one on camera. Are they staying off camera, or do folks want to turn on their camera before I? Okay, there we go. Here we go, everybody. Here we go. Welcome back, everybody. Good to see you all again. So
Zoe, Richard, and Ashani are going to be coming back to Black Liberation Media with Jared tomorrow to do another Gen Z panel. 100 days in, we're a little past 100 days, but we're trying to navigate end of school year schedules and travels and et cetera. And so thank you, Jared, for agreeing to once again be the moderator for the panel. I thank the young people for agreeing. Shout out to Josie and Public Square Amplified for being kind of the brain behind this whole conversation to begin with, which started back before the elections. So Zoe, why don't you start as the senior journalist for Public Square Amplified, and you can tell folks about Gen Z and what they can expect, and then we can have Ashani and Richard jump in.
Sure, yeah. So you're right that it started between a conversation between Josie and I, where we were talking about how Gen Z tends to be the focus of so many different narratives, statistics. I mean, we see it all the time. They're always changing, but Gen Z tends to remain the subject for a lot of these things, whether it's Gen Z doesn't want to work. Gen Z's like the most horrible generation to work with in the workplace. We see those narratives around. Or a few years ago, it was, Gen Z, they're going to be the change makers. They're going to be the ones to fix everything. We're constantly kind of seen as the subject of all of these narratives and statistics. And so I kind of came to Josie and said, well, what if we, get together some members of Gen Z, kind of give it a range, and bring them to the center to start talking about where do they sit on these things. Our generation is incredibly diverse, not just, demographics wise, but, politically, ideologically, we're a very diverse generation, partly, I think, due to our social media usage and how we tend to get siloed off and stuff like that. But we really wanted to bring a lot of Gen Z to come together, and we've brought them together twice so far. This is our third time, but to talk about their current political paradigm, the current political landscape, and not just how they see it or how they see themselves in it, but also how they want to transform it, what they think needs to be done, things like that. So once again, thank you so much for having us here on Black Liberation Media. It's always a pleasure and always an honor.
Thank you. Richard, can you talk about what you're really looking forward to for the panel? Let's put Jared on the spot. What are you looking forward to talking about? And Jared, your job is going to be not to forget what Richard said.
Yeah, so I'll introduce myself as well. Hello, everyone. I'm Richard. I've been doing these panels since last summer, and every time I've been on one of these, it's always been a really cool growth experience for me. I was challenged, I was critiqued, and I also got to kind of speak my mind and have my thoughts kind of evolve throughout the past month. So just as a thinker and as a concerned citizen, I really feel like these panels have helped me grow, and I was able. And it's really cool to have that documented as well. So it's always been a pleasure doing these panels. And what I'm looking forward to discussing, of course, we are in we are in the Trump administration era right now, and I do have a lot of policies. I really do want to talk about kind of the status of science because it is something that I'm studying in university right now, and I feel like science communication, and Trump recently issued a new gold standard science, which kind of embroils science in politics. I mean, it's always been embroiled in politics, but I really do feel like there's a lot to talk about there, and definitely the agenda that Trump is pushing with this, and kind of like the silence and layoffs of a bunch of federal scientists and funding as well, and how that can kind of trickle down and affect the greater country of the United States of America. So I definitely want to talk about that, the acceleration of technology. I really do think that kind of Gen Z's focus, or why we're focusing on Gen Z now, is because we grew up in a really weird era of technology. And as Zoe mentioned before, social media has created a lot of echo chambers, and there's just a huge abundance of information kind of at the top of a button. So I feel like a lot of people my age and people growing up with cell phones since they were 10 years old have a lot of information to navigate, and navigating or distinguishing misinformation versus information as well. So I really do think that that kind of has a lot to do with why I feel like Gen Z is a lot more politically polarized as well. And I'm definitely looking forward to maybe ways we can reconcile that. So yeah, that's kind of just what I'm thinking. And thank you guys so much for having me on here. It's really cool that I'm back on Black Liberation Media again. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Ashani is our resident high school student, which I think a lot of people don't realize that you're still in high school, and I'm always impressed every time we release one of Ashani's pieces, the amount of work that she does as a budding journalist. Talk about why you decided that you were going to participate in the Gen Z panel.
Of course. So for everyone that doesn't know, my name is Ashani. I'm a junior, almost senior at Edison High School here in Central Jersey. And I've been in Public Square for way more than a year now, probably 1.5 years. And I've had the best time writing articles that go from everything from civics to democracy to femicide to stories that go past our borders and transcend into international waters. And I think for me, the Gen Z panel is so exciting because right now we're in such a crazy political climate where every day the headlines are saying something unprecedented. The norm is now that things aren't the norm ever. And so in such a crazy world, it's very therapeutic almost to get together with other people in my generation and have a discussion where we can clearly articulate what our major concerns are, but also where we have hope. Because while these times might seem very pessimistic and very negative, having such conversations can be quite uplifting.
Thank you. And I'm going to put Eugene on the spot. So I don't know if you all know who Eugene is, because you're a little young. So I don't know how many of you watch Breakthrough News. I was schooled this morning to realize that I would have been Eugene's school counselor when he was in high school. So I'm still trying to get over that age gap. But Eugene, do you have any questions for the young people? We've got like a few minutes before, because we have to end on time with the pre-record, Jared, correct? Like it'll shut us down at 2 hours, does it not?
You know what? I'm not entirely sure. I
want to make sure we don't get.
I didn't think about that.
Right. Yeah. So I don't want us to get chopped mid-sentence. But Eugene, is there anything that you would like to present to the young people as someone who is in a journalist space, who did not study to be a journalist, but has become like this voice of the people? Is there anything that you'd like to impart or ask our young people?
Well, I don't want to ruin the panel tomorrow, so I'll just have to watch it. But I am very curious to see about the points of hope that young people are seeing now. I guess I still consider myself young, so I got a few too. But I mean, I would just say I think it's fantastic. I mean, I think we need more popular communicators, more people who can go out and cover stories, talk about them, analyze them, and help people understand. So you get in where you fit in. Obviously, journalism now, you know, the context of the finances of it have become so complex. So it's an uphill climb in a way maybe it didn't used to be to get engaged, but I think we need it more than ever. So I just commend y'all for being willing to lean in on this front, because this is definitely what we need.
Thank you. And I'm sorry that we ended up cutting you all short, but maybe we could do like a tape. Go ahead. Jared,
I was just going to say, I'm not entirely sure what will happen, but let's, if folks want to have, I don't want to cut us short. So if necessary, I will just do the difficult labor of the editing and the reposting and all of that. I will just make a sacrifice, throw myself on the pyre of revolutionary work and struggle once again. No, so yeah, but seriously, let's not worry too much about the exact moment, the 2-hour limit.
But we can also, I think, and this might be good to do, is to do like a little after panel. You know, like, is there anything that we missed during the panel? We could do it on Patreons that only are, you know, so we could strive to get people to watch, and then we can share it. I will say the response to the Gen Z panel has been really good, and I'm glad that we moved in the first one. We didn't do like a live stream, and I'm glad we moved to a live stream because it gives more opportunity for people to kind of just jump in and listen to what you all are saying. So for logistics purposes, it is tomorrow on June 1st. We get started at 3 p.m. It will live stream direct here on Black Liberation Media. And I don't know, Zoe, do you want to talk a little bit about like who all is going to participate outside of, you know, our dear Dr. Jared Ball, who will be moderating?
Sure. I'll keep it brief, but we definitely have a very wide range of folks who are going to be talking. It's a group of 7 or 8. I'm blanking exactly, but we have a good group, mostly folks from the East Coast, but still wide range ideologically. But we have some folks who are at the Ivy League schools right now, some folks who went to school in state in Jersey. We have Ashani, our resident high schooler. We have a filmmaker, a Syrian filmmaker. We have folks in law school, folks in, I also see that it's over 2 hours now and we're still recording, so I think we might be okay. But folks in law school, folks working in tech, we have a lot of folks, and all of them bring in the heat. They all bring on the heat in their own really unique ways. And so it always makes for a really good discussion, and a lot of different viewpoints come up, and it's always a really good space to be in.
All right, perfect. Jared, is there anything that you want to share about to prep the young people to get ready for tomorrow?
No, I need to prep. I was just looking at the run sheet that Josie sent, and so I need to prep. I'm glad I have a couple hours before tomorrow, and but I'm just looking forward to it. I think the discussions have been great. I've even used them in my own classes, just as an example of what folks closer to my students' age than I am are dealing with and how they're approaching it. I do want to just quickly say that to the extent that any of you are not aware of Eugene's work, please do make sure you're following Breakthrough News, adding that to your media diet, and consider, among other things, even joining the PSL. But I do know that a number of you
proceed with caution, though, because you know Eugene be having people screaming from the back of the room like they're in the pulpits, and so you know just be just be warned that once you fall down that hole, there's not likely much climbing out of it, and it's a good space to be in. So I encourage you to just dive full in. Like don't even worry about what's going to happen, because at worst you're going to learn something. And I feel like there's no downside to that, right? Richard, Ashani, would you like to Richard, you go first. Is there anything that you want to add before we close out?
I mean, it's kind of echoing what Zoe says. It's always a pleasure being in a space with a bunch of different people from diverse perspectives. And It is as much of a growing experience for me as I hope it is for everyone watching the panel. So I do really encourage everyone to tune in because I really do think that it is a productive way to kind of, I guess, like learn how to maybe make sense of what our contemporary politics are now. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Ashani?
I mean, I'll keep it brief. It's the same thing that Zoe and Richard said. It's a great opportunity for both us, the panelists, and everyone who's watching to see, what the young generation's thinking and how it connects to what other generations are feeling and doing. And it's just an awesome intergenerational space to be in.
Thank you. Eugene, do you want to close? You have anything you want to add? Is there anything that we should, before we let you all go, like anything that you want to make sure we haven't said? And y'all just be warned, we are going to bring him back. Now that I know Eugene will answer my emails.
Look, that was look, I don't know what happened. That was a very I don't know exactly what happened.
Listen,
but either way,
it took Jared a long time to answer my first email, and then once he did, he was like, "Dang, I shouldn't have ignored her all this time." So see, this is how it works. Like he's trying to make the face like he ain't know.
It's never a conscious, ignoring. It's just
yeah. I thought it was actually from like 2 weeks ago, and I was like, "Oh wow, 2024." I really dropped the ball on that one. But yeah, I think we hit all the points. I mean, I hope folks are able to check us out at youtube.com/breakthrough news, at BT Newsroom, across all your social media. I'm at Eugene Puryear on X. For whatever reason, I'm still there, and it's the only one I have. But I'm we're always happy to have anyone find us who hasn't found us before. And big shout out to everyone who's been supporting us so far. I really appreciate it.
Oh, right on. Hey, listen, congratulations on the growth of Breakthrough, and thanks to the guests we're going to see tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern, Public Square Amplified. And listen, been a great show. Thanks, everybody. And to the undefeated chat that I know is being undefeated, peace and welcome, and thanks to you. Thanks, everybody. And as always, peace only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. We'll see you later on and next week with more Saturday with Renee.